Right, good afternoon, everybody. It's 2:30, so welcome to this afternoon's Rushcliffe Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Richard Butler, I'm the chairman of the committee, and next to me is Councillor Wells, who is the vice chairman. I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information England Regulation 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch your microphones off when you're not speaking and also to switch them on when you are speaking. Also on the top table this afternoon are officers who I have Mrs. Dodd, who is the Planning Manager in Development, Mr. Hilton, who is a Senior Planning Officer, Ms. Thompson, who is Area Planning Officer, Mr. Mountain, who is also an Area Planning Officer, and Mrs. Walker, who is the Borough Solicitor. So with that said, I'd move on to the first item on the agenda, which is, or are the apologies for absence and substitute members, please.
We have apologies from Councillor Thomas, Councillor Georgiou, Councillor Perec, and substituting we have Councillor Way, Councillor Bird and Councillor Ellis.
Thank you very much. And and welcome to substitute members again. It's appreciated you taking your time to come over and step in for colleagues. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct or under the Planning Code? Councillor Reddybean.
Yeah, I'm the ward member for Bunny, so I have to excuse myself for that from the debate for that matter.
Thank you. Any other declarations? I don't think there are. No. Okay, thank you very much. And just before we go into the minutes of the previous meeting, can I just check with colleagues that you've received the various late notifications and extra information that have been emailed out, and we've got hard copies and we've all seen and read them. So, yep, all done that. Thank you. So, item 3 is minutes or our minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 8th of June. And those of us here, are we happy that those are a correct record?
Yes.
Yep, thank you. So,
Chair, could I make 2 comments on the minutes, please?
Yep.
On the item relating to the Newton development, paragraph 10. Third line down, it says, until details of measures to restrict HGVs exiting the site left. I actually moved officers' recommendations at the last planning meeting, and the point about the left turn was not to restrict it, which actually means to limit or reduce the use. It was to stop it. So I would prefer the use of stop or prevent in place of restrict. I think that more accurately reflects the committee's determination.
Could you just clarify which paragraph again, just to make it clear?
10.
Paragraph 10.
Regardless of the details shown.
Yes, right. I
think
think
that was quite a salient point,
Yeah.
Chair. It was one of the main objections, and I think restrict is not a strong enough expression.
right. I'm sure we can do something about that. I'll just take some advice and see how we can manage that. Thank you. Right, we can do something. This is the actual decision notice that's been published and sent out. So this is the decision. But your observation, we can, or the council can write to the applicant and pointing that out. And then when the time comes that the work is commenced and completed and conditions are discharged, that can be made clear at that point, I think, can't it? So although we can't physically change the minutes, your observation is noted and will be notified to the applicant. And then when as I say, when the time comes when they do the work, then that's
Thank you, Chair. That's very acceptable.
So thank you for that. Well done for reading the minutes in detail. And does any apart from that, is everyone else happy with the minutes? Yep. Okay. So I'll just need to sign those. Right, thank you for that. So we go on to the main reason we're here this afternoon, which is to discuss and decide today's planning applications. And the first application that's on the agenda today is land at the former Bunny Brickworks on Loughborough Road, Bunny. And this is the outline application for erection of up to 110 dwellings and up to 5,600 square metres of employment units, including associated infrastructure, access, roadway, parking, landscape, amenity areas, with all matters reserved except for the access arrangements. And Mr. Hilton, you're going to lead us through this, I think, please. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. So members are advised that there are late representations which have been circulated. Attention is drawn to the second late representation, which relates to an amendment to wording of some of the proposed conditions, including amendments to allow for a phased development of the site. The third late representation that's been circulated also sets out a rewording of the recommendation as the section 106 has not yet been signed. And in addition, a note to applicant is proposed requiring 1% of dwellings to be wheelchair adaptable where the total number of dwellings exceeds 100. So the application seeks outline planning permission for up to 110 dwellings and up to 5,600 square metres of employment units, with all matters reserved except for access. It's proposed that the residential element of the development would take its access via a new access point from Gotham Lane to the north of the site. And the commercial element would take its access via the existing point from Loughborough Road A60 to the east of the site. So in terms of the commercial element, this could comprise a mix of offices, light industrial, storage or distribution uses. How do we
Make it bigger, brighter.
say that's not visible?
Is it the light shining on it?
Yeah, just turn the lights. We'll turn the lights.
Yeah.
I think the caption at the top is pushing it down.
Yeah, I don't know how to change it. What's in the view?
Well, that's better.
I think it's the viewer.
Go to the view in that corner.
Yes.
If you alter the brightness on the screen, look there.
That's better, isn't it?
It's still
Is that okay?
That's better.
Okay.
Yeah, Councillor Calvert.
Could we go back to the first slide with the access point on the lane, because that was very blurry.
Yes, we will do that. We're just adjusting the settings to make it a bit clearer for to see on the screen. So we'll go, if we go back to the first slide with the access arrangements, please.
That's the first slide.
That's the one.
Yes.
There's a view of Golden Lane.
Okay.
Yes, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that
Yeah,
visible
that's
enough then? Is that okay?
That's as clear as it will be.
Okay. So just looking at the aerial photo there, so the site relates to a former brickworks which has been closed for a number of years, and I think the site's been cleared for at least 2 decades. It comprises of an area of hard standing towards the centre of the site, and then you've got sort of scrubland and vegetation to the edges, particularly to the north and to the east, where you've got fairly robust tree screen at present. The site is located to the south of Bunny, so just towards the top of this photo you can see a ribbon of properties running along Gotham Lane. The main settlement of Bunny is just to the north off the image there. And then to the south of the site we've got the Johnson's aggregates site, aggregates processing site, and then to the west we've got the Bunny trading estate. They've got commercial units there in some of the former brickworks buildings that have been retained. The site was formerly in the green belt, but it was inset through the adoption of the local plan part 2, and it is an allocated site under policy 23 of local plan part 2. I'm just going to take you through some photos of the site. So this is the approach along Gotham Lane, heading towards the junction with the A60. So on the right hand side you can see Bunny Trading Estate, one of the former brickworks buildings that's been retained there. And just in front, heading towards the corner of this road, is the proposed access point for the residential element of the scheme. And then again, you can just see just around here is going to be the access point. So as you can see here, there are residential properties to the northern side of Gotham Lane, opposite the site. And then just off this image, there is also a residential property and a care home adjacent to the site. This is a view from the junction between Gotham Lane and this is heading south along the A60 towards the site access for the commercial element. And this is a view of the existing site access, which currently serves the aggregate site. And then this is a view back towards Bunny. So this is a view from the, we've got some bunding at the moment, just as you come into the site, and this is the view heading broadly west. You can see the trading estate in the distance. It's within the site showing the hard standing, and then the sort of vegetation where it's sort of regrown to the edges of the site. And then just in the distance there, we're looking towards Bunny Hill, and in front of that, the Johnson's aggregate site. And then there's just another view towards the aggregate site. And there's a view broadly towards Bunny, which is largely hidden from view. There is a area of woodland to the corner of the A60 and Gotham Lane, as you can see here, which it falls outside of the site. And then just here is the trading estate on the left hand side, and then around here is where the access will be taken off Gotham Lane for the residential elements. So just going to the developments in a bit more detail, I'm going to show you some indicative layout plan. As I've said before, it is an outline application, so we are only considering matter of access. All other matters, including landscaping, layout, appearance and scale, would be subject to consideration at reserved matters stage if the outline application were to be approved. But just looking at this indicative image, clearly we've got the commercial element proposed to the south of the site, residential element to the north. The intention is that the commercial element would act as a buffer from the existing aggregates operations, which are intended to continue to the south of the site or beyond the south of the site. And these drawings just show, these are just technical drawings, show the proposed access points from, or the proposed access point from Gotham Lane, and the existing access point to be upgraded from the A60. So just in terms of the proposal, we're looking at an outline application for up to 110 houses and commercial uses. The allocation under policy 23 is for around 100, but it is officers' views that 110 is not unrealistic or a significant departure from that figure. So we're not looking at an absolute figure, it is around 100 homes that's allocated. And looking at policy 23 of the local plan part 2, the site has been through scrutiny as part of the adoption of the local plan. And that policy sets out broad parameters of what we would expect to see on the site. So like I said, the separation of the residential to the north and commercial to the south of the site. So we're obviously considering access, and the application has been accompanied by a transport assessment. And from the technical drawings you can see here, the applicants considered elements such as the required visibility displays from both entrances, depending on the passing vehicle speeds. The Highway Authority have been consulted on the application. We've been through fairly extensive discussions with them, and we're at a point where they do not object to the scheme following the submission of this technical information. And as part of the application, highway improvements are sought as detailed in condition 20 of the application. So I think we've already covered the potential impact of the aggregate site on future occupants. So that's something we've clearly considered carefully, and that's why we've looked at the commercial element and also a buffer between that and the residential element. And policy 25 sets out, condition 25 sets out what we'd be seeking for the commercial element of the scheme in terms of a number of controls to try and mitigate any impact, but clearly we'll be considering details of the commercial element as part of reserved matters. Just go back to the layout scheme. So in terms of residential amenity, they've got the properties to the north. The plan is indicative, but it shows a buffer between the residential elements and the neighbouring properties. And it's officers' view that this does indicate that the site is capable of accommodating a scheme of this scale without an undue detrimental impact on neighbouring properties, obviously subject to satisfactory design, layout, scale, etc. at reserved matters stage. So on that basis, the application is before you with a recommendation to delegate to the Director of Planning and Economic Growth to grant outline planning permission subject to the signing of the Section 106.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hilton. We do have some speakers on this item from visitors and also ward member. So this is the time now that we open the floor up to our guests. The first speaker is Charlotte Stainton. So welcome. And the way it works, everyone, is that the speaker has up to 5 minutes to address the committee. And if you're still speaking when 5 minutes is up, we have to be a bit strict and ask you to stop. And so as soon as you're ready to speak, press the right-hand button, the red light will come on, and you can start talking to us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is exactly the type of brownfield land that we should all be working together to bring forward for development. This type of development relieves pressure on greenbelt sites. As you know, planning applications must be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Your local plan was adopted following a rigorous process of independent examination, with the inspector concluding that the plan was sound. The allocation in policy 23 has established that this site will be developed for mixed housing and employment uses. And the local plan inspector agreed with the council that around 100 homes and B1, B2 and B8 employment uses are appropriate. Excuse me. My client's planning application was submitted to the council 2 years ago in July 21. Since that time, we have worked closely with your planning officers to ensure that all the relevant issues have been addressed. We have submitted a detailed set of technical reports, including site investigation, tree surveys, ecology surveys, flood risk and drainage, transport assessment and archaeology reports. Every piece of information requested by your officers has been provided. The officer report confirms that Highways England, Highway Authority, Natural England, Ecology and Sustainability Officer, the Flood and Drainage Consultees, County Archaeology, Senior Design and Landscape Officer, and your Environmental Health Officer have all raised no objection, subject to detailed conditions which have been agreed by the applicant. The housing officer sought 30% affordable housing. This has been agreed in full by the applicant and would be controlled by the Section 106. The provision of 30% affordable housing should carry very significant weight in your decision today. The requests submitted by the County Council Planning Policy, NHS, Communities Officer, County Education have all been agreed in full by the applicant, and these issues again are covered in the conditions in the Section 106. All the relevant issues have been addressed, and there are no technical reasons for refusal that would be backed up by your professional advisors. It's very important to recognise this is an outline application. This would establish the principle of the development in accordance with the allocation in your local plan. The master plan submitted is indicative. Only the points of access would be fixed if permission is granted, and the Highway Authority has clearly advised you these are acceptable. The layout, scale, design and landscaping of the scheme would be fully within your control at the reserve matters stage. The reserve matters is the stage when all the details of the proposed development would be submitted, and that is the stage to consider the layout and required level of buffer between employment and residential uses. Objections which relate to the layout shown on the plan are not a material consideration for you today. Do not get dragged into a neighbour dispute. We note that the objector from the adjacent commercial site has stated they would welcome collaborative involvement, and I confirm that the developer will work with the neighbour to discuss the proposed layout, boundary treatments and buffers in designing their reserve matters scheme. Your officer has very clearly advised you at paragraphs 56 and 57 that the layout plan is indicative and would be subject to full consideration at the reserve matters stage. Once the scale and layout of the development is designed, at that point it will be possible to fully assess any noise and visual impact issues in relation to the recycling operations nearby, and to ensure that the appropriate design changes are made accordingly. Your Environmental Health Officer is fully in agreement with this approach. It is illogical to object to the principle of this mixed-use development when it has been allocated in the local plan. In conclusion, development on brownfield land helps relieve pressure on the green belt. This is fully in accordance with your local plan. Housing and employment on this site is already part of the council's future supply calculations. We are only seeking an outline permission. There are no objections from technical consultees. 30% affordable housing should carry significant weight. Your planning officers have made a clear recommendation for approval, and this recommendation has not been made on balance or with any concerns highlighted. The details of the scheme will be under the full control of the council at the reserve matters stage.
Seconds.
We ask you please to support this outline scheme, which will bring forward one of your key local plan brownfield sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just within 5 minutes as well, so thank you for that. And our next speaker on this item is Mr. Gould, Nigel Gould. So welcome, and you're speaking as an objector to the application, and so as you see, you've got up to 5 minutes to address the committee. So as soon as you're ready, it's the right-hand button.
Chair, members of the Planning Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Nigel Gould, as you said, from Heaton's Planning. I speak on behalf of Johnson's Aggregates and Recycling Limited, the operator of the Bunny Waste Recycling Centre. The waste site is located adjacent to the proposed development site. Indeed, the access to the waste site falls in the boundary of this application. The Waste Recycling Centre processes incinerator bottom ash. There are significant HGV and plant movements on and to the waste site. Whilst Johnson's are a responsible waste management operator, the nature of the operations undertaken at the facility are such that nearby residential properties could experience malodour and loss of amenity due to noise and dust. Our letter of objection raised 4 key points, which we do not believe have been fully countered. Firstly, conflict with national policy. Paragraph 187 of the NPPF is clear that planning decisions should ensure that new development can be integrated effectively with existing businesses, and that crucially, existing businesses and facilities should not have unreasonable restrictions placed on them as a result of development permitted after they were established. The clear land use conflict is likely to result in complaints relating to poor living conditions and standards of amenity, which in turn could impact upon Johnson's, the County Council, the Borough Council and the well-being of future residents. Should this application be approved, it will not be acceptable to require Johnson's to retrofit mitigation measures in order to continue their operations. In this case, the agent of change is the applicant, not Johnson's. The application does not address the likely effects to the waste site or any other businesses to the west of the application site. The proposal is therefore contrary to paragraphs 187 and 188 of the NPPF. Secondly, conflict with the development plan. Policy 23 lists several constraints and is copied in paragraph 83 of the committee report. The proposal fails part A. The employment use does not cover the whole site of the south part, as no employment buffer is proposed between the access to and from the waste site and the proposed residential properties, as shown quite clearly on the drawing in front of you. It cannot be determined whether the proposed development is in compliance with Policy 23 due to a lack of detailed consideration of levels of amenity for future residents. This also represents uncertainty over compliance with other policies relating to protection of amenity. Local Plan Part 1 Policies 10 and 15, Local Plan Policy Part 2 Policies 1 and 23. The principle of utilising any B2 industrial land to soften the impact of waste management operations at the waste site is illogical. Rather than safeguarded residential amenity, B2 land uses are far more likely to result in further loss of amenity to the residential properties. The adverse cumulative impacts of B2 development, coupled with the existing waste operations, are potentially significant. It is important to note that the proposed residential dwellings are even closer to the HGV route used by vehicles entering and exiting the waste site. Thirdly, amenity impact on future residents. The application should be supported by a robust assessment of potential amenity and conditions for future and existing residents. This has not been addressed, and Johnson's needs surety now that the siting of 120 dwellings adjacent to a regionally significant waste management operation can safeguard future residential amenity. The presence of the old landfill site is also an issue that needs addressing, as advised by the Environment Agency. Fourthly, highways matters. The application proposes to share access to the proposed employment land with Johnson's. Johnson's has significant concerns regarding this cumulative impact on both the viability of its business and the amenity of residents adjoining the proposed housing site. It has not been satisfactorily demonstrated that the proposed access would not lead to significant risks of collisions and conflict between different road users. One other point, in addition to the policies of the Rushcliffe Development Plan that aim to safeguard residential amenity, policy WCS 10 of the Nottinghamshire Waste Course Strategy aims to safeguard waste management operations from land use conflict. This application does not demonstrate accordance with policy WCS 10. In our view, the application conflicts with this policy. In conclusion, the application site cannot deliver 110 dwellings without inevitable land use conflict. The proposal does not accord a policy. The principle cannot be determined without the detailed technical assessments, air, noise and amenity. The above conclusions are supported by the previous refusal of planning permission for residential development at this site and recent appeal decisions. To ensure the protection of Johnson's existing waste and recycling business, the detailed assessments need to be undertaken now. It is contrary to policy and against the principle of protection of existing businesses to allow these matters to be dealt with at a later stage. The matters raised are of such importance that the principle cannot be determined at this outline stage, and the application should be refused for the reasons I state. Finally, I note that Rushcliffe Borough Council can demonstrate a housing land supply significantly above the 5-year requirement. It is therefore not considered that the benefits of providing additional housing numbers in an inappropriate location outweighs the conflict with the development plan. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gould. Again, just in time, so thank you for that. And our final speaker is the ward member, Councillor Edivine. So as soon as you know what to do, as soon as you're ready, this is the right hand button, please.
I'm new to the Bunny Ward and I've obviously done my best to get up to speed with this application. and it's a site that's been under consideration for many years, as the report shows. So, Chairman and committee members, this site was included in the local plan 9 years ago, and since then much has changed. We now have much more than a 5-year land supply, and surely we should be ensuring that as a borough we develop the most suitable sites and not the least suitable. This application is for outline planning, as has been stated, with all matters reserved except for access, and it's this that I mainly object to. A development of this size should be accompanied by a full planning application that considers the entire development as it will be proposed. Whilst accompanied by many documents, such as an outline master plan, these are not final documents, as has already been said, even though some in the report seem to have been treated as such in the report. It's disappointing, to say the least, that Highways have no objections, especially given that Councillor Dare, the former ward member, but also a county councillor, has highlighted the lack of a proper traffic impact assessment on already busy roads. My main area of concern is the proximity of the recycling operation to the proposed site. The report itself deals with the principle of development in paragraph 50 onwards, and in it states that the inspector, in approving local plan part 2, has established the principle of development at this site. An outline planning application is not needed to establish the principle of development. A full planning application is needed to ensure that the further comments made by the inspector are fully considered. And I particularly point out part B of that, and it states that once occupied, the amenity of residents should not be adversely affected by noise, odour or dust from the activities of the neighbouring employment site. This site does include the recycling facility, not within the application site, but adjacent to it. And I understand that in recent years, the activity on this site has increased substantially in certain areas. And I believe this has led to problems with nearby residents from exactly the issues highlighted, i.e. noise, dust and odour. An outline application does not deal with these issues, and I urge the committee to reject the recommendation and demand that any application considered should be a full planning application accompanied by a master plan that demonstrates that the inspector's conditions for development have been considered and acted on, and that future residents, should development take place, will be able to coexist with the neighbouring employment site and recycling centre. And I have to say that's something I very much doubt can be achieved.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got that. So, right, so that's the final speaker on this. So we've heard from the agent for the applicant, and we also heard from a resident objector and the ward member, Councillor Edivine. Points being raised primarily in connection with the development plan or contravention, or the objectors are unhappy with the fact that it's outlined not full. Concerns about the impact on the Johnson's aggregates and potential impact on future business plans of theirs, but also concerns about impact on residents and amenity. And we heard from Mr. Gould, who was speaking in particular on behalf of the business nearby, Johnson's Aggregates, and referred to HGV, ash and other potential conflicts, which again is worried that they're worried could have negative impacts both on business and residents. And Councillor Edivine pointed out this has been going on for a long time. He thinks quite a lot has changed since the local plan was first agreed, and Highways concerns and comments. I think those are the main issues that people both for and against are picking up on. Would you like to come back on any of those, please, to help us out? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So clearly, in terms of the relationship with the aggregate sites, we wouldn't be seeking for the future development to prejudice the operations of that site, and it's important that the two can coexist, and that's clear from from policy. I think there's two things to look at. First is the policy approach. So clearly, as part of the adoption of Local Plan Part 2, this went through examination and hearing. The inspector's report is in paragraph 137 of the inspector's report, makes reference to the provisions to safeguard living conditions of future occupiers and clearly acknowledges the existing uses. And that is then fed into policy 23 and hence the reasoning for the requirement for the southern part of the site or southern half of the site to be commercial use to act as a buffer. And this is further clarified in paragraph 7.3 under policy 23, which sets out that mitigation measures should include but not be limited to a suitable buffer zone. So in terms of the safeguards, we're looking at an outline application. Matters of layout, etc., would be considered at reserve matters stage, and policy 5 sets out various requirements for any commercial uses, and that would include carrying out a noise impact assessment as part of the reserve matters process. Anything else? I think so. That's just in terms of the aggregates element of it. So we're satisfied that with a suitable buffer secured at reserve matter stage, that we can alleviate those concerns. In terms of highway considerations, clearly we're guided by the Highway Authority as the technical consultees, and we have submitted transport assessments, technical drawings to them, and they are clearly satisfied with that, subject to the various recommended improvements, which includes footway links to Bunny, so footway improvements for to the closest bus stops, but also highway improvements on the A60, including an extended turn right lane into the site to prevent vehicles waiting on the highway and obstructing traffic. And we would control a detailed specification of the highway access and arrangements as part of the, or the further details of the highways as part of the reserve matters.
Well, if there's any other queries, we can come back to those as we discuss the item. So right, well, so it's now down to committee now to any questions, comments, and eventually we need to make a decision on this. So does anyone have any points to raise at this point? Councillor Bird and then Councillor Calvert, please.
Yes, I'm afraid I've forgotten the names of the people who talked, but the lady who talked at the beginning highlighted that there would be 30% affordable housing, which of course I think we would all welcome. But given that it's outline planning permission, does that 30% apply in a full planning? So that would have to be confirmed. Thank you.
That's a very good, understandable question. I think I know the answer, but we'll just get the professional answer.
So clearly, for the purpose of this application, we have a draft section 106, which sets out that requirement to be carried through to the reserve matter stage. If we're looking at a full application, that would be a new planning consideration, but we clearly have a requirement to deliver 30% affordable housing in that location.
May I ask another question relating to that? If that were then to go to full planning, would there be a requirement that they would be delivered at a particular time, or would it be sort of generalised?
How would that work?
Yeah, so usually that's set out in the section 106 legal agreement at this stage. So we would say 30% affordable housing, and we'll say how that's split, whether that's rented or shared ownership. And we'll say at so many dwellings, at market dwellings, we'll expect this number of affordable dwellings to be provided, and then at the next number of market dwellings there'll be another lot of affordable dwellings. So it sort of splits as the site's built out. They build out a proportion of affordable, and normally that's all set out in the legal agreement in the details in there.
Brilliant, thank you.
Does that help? Okay. Councillor Calvert.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed or note that it's an allocated site in LPP2, which makes it very difficult to argue against. But I must say I'm not very happy with the highways conclusions, but I believe that's the County Council's bag. It's right on the corner, isn't it, the access? And I think it's some of the chevrons on the corner seem to coincide with it. So anyway, that it is what it is, but I'd be very concerned about traffic speeding on an eastward direction towards Bunny. And there was reference to the fact that there was a speed limit of 30 changes quite rapidly as you go westwards. So concerns about that. I've got concerns about the bus stops as well, particularly the bus stop coming out of the city going southwards. That seemed to be quite a distance from the site. Finally, on the overall transport assessment, it was dated, I think, 2019, and things may have changed considerably since then. So I would have a query about whether there'll be a renewed requirement on the applicant to refresh transport assessment. My last comment is the issue raised by the ward councillor and saying that really it all should be considered as a master plan and a full application. I strongly support that, and I don't really approve of this approval by stealth where you just give it a little bit of approval and a little bit more and a little bit more. But my query on that is that a material consideration? Is that something that we can use as a reason for not approving? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. So yes, well, shall we go to that one first, the query about the master plan, and then go on to the highway issues, I think, just to answer that clarity. Because I mean, of course, if it got to a position where it got to a full application, then the master plan then would be open to discussion and debate, I assume. But anyway, sorry, I'm taking you comment on that.
Sorry, so to clarify, are councillors wondering whether you can refuse it on the grounds it's only an outline? Is that the query? I think what you would need to think about is a little bit deeper in terms of what would your material considerations be? What are your particular concerns with how this information is presented that makes you think something's lacking? So I think you would struggle to structure a reason that said it should be a full application. If councils have specific areas where they feel they need the full information, I would probably direct you more to thinking in detail about what might be lacking that you might like to see. So does that help a little bit?
Yeah. Thank you. And then the highways comments, as Councillor Calvert said, they are what they are, and obviously we're very much in that. Well, we are in the hands of the Highways Authority, who are the professionals on this. But if you could just pick up on those points, and also the location of the southern facing bus stop.
Thank you, Chairman. So just in terms of the comments about the date of the transport assessment, I want to cover that. An updated transport assessment, sort of covering letter was submitted, which addressed more recent traffic counts. So, because clearly, things have changed since 2019. So we have had that updated information received and passed to Highways for their consideration.
So how do you update that? So the query about the proximity of the bus stop, but I suspect the answer to that might be the fact that the Highways felt that there isn't another viable location for the bus stop, but I think they've asked for some improvements to the existing bus stops. I'm sure about that, but if you can just confirm that.
Thank you, Chairman. So we did explore other potential bus stop and crossing point locations, and clearly there was potential for a bus stop and crossing point near the A60 access. However, following extensive consideration and discussion in highway departments, there were road safety concerns with pedestrians crossing at what is a bit of a blind corner and a national speed limit. So on that basis, highways were satisfied that the existing bus stops on the edge of Bunny would be within a sufficient proximity if footway improvements were included as part of the works.
And of course, there are proposals to widen the footways along the Goton Lane and Loughborough Road, aren't there? So does that help?
It helps a little. It's just to me, the site feels just about sustainable. But when you get issues like the fact that the bus stop is going to be 600 metres away, puts it even further towards uncertainty in terms of its sustainability. But you know, that's just my view.
That's right.
We can't do anything about it. It's allocated.
No, that's perfectly understandable questions. Right, Councillor Walker and then Councillor Ellis, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm exercised by what we've heard and read about the buffer and the mitigation measures needed in respect of the adjacent site. Particularly insofar as the extent to which that ought to be or needs to be considered on a sort of principle basis now, given what we've heard about the specific circumstances. If I understood correctly, what the agent for the applicant said was, in effect, disregard it all now, because that will be determined at reserve matters stage, whereas I can't quite marry that up against what we've seen in the reports, where it's sort of dealt with in some detail, particularly in relation to the county council, the response, and then we heard the other two speakers referenced it. So that's something that I'm not clear on. Perhaps I have a response, and I might, if I could come back up.
Of course you can, yes. So the points that Councillor Walker has raised, Matt, can you do those?
Thank you, Chairman. So clearly the buffer would be part and parcel of the landscaping and layouts agreed at reserve matter stage if the application was to progress to that stage, and that buffer could, for example, take the form of an acoustic fence or a bund, depending on the outcomes of noise impact assessments and the overall layout of the site. So I think, yes, it would be something that we consider at reserve matters. We have to come back to the point we are only considering the details of access at this stage.
So the point is that the principle of the buffer is there, but the detail of it would still come at reserve matters. Very quiet.
Yeah, well, the very few brain cells that I've got perhaps working on overdrive. You know, what those of us that have been around this block more than once before, are likely to be concerned about in that context is we've seen applications like this at this stage come forwards with indicative plans showing a potential type of development that would be consistent. So here, it might look like this. This is how we can fit 110 on with a buffer that might look like this. The principle is agreed on that basis. We then come to a reserve matters application when we're told, yes, I know we showed you that indicative master plan before, but that was the only indicative master plan and everything's changed. And then we might, in this instance, might be worried about, well, where the buffer's gone, and we're advised, oh, well, the principle's been established for 110 houses, so this is the best type we could get. So that's where I'm, that's a source of concern to me.
Right, so, well, Yes, Mrs. Dodd.
Thank you, Chairman. So if it puts members' minds at rest, I'm just trying to find the correct condition. We do have a condition requiring those noise impact surveys to take place. I think what it's important to emphasise, it is for the applicant to demonstrate that that residential site can be built and can be protected from any noise. So that it is on them to do that. So although the agent has spoken on behalf of the Bunny aggregate site, there is no requirement on them. They are not part of the application. We cannot require them and would not require them to change their practices to accommodate this site. It is for the residential site, for the people developing that, to provide something that protects them, and whether that might be a bund or an acoustic fence or some trees. But you are quite right, it is an indicative layout and it could change, and that is what happens with outline planning permissions. So there is an opportunity for it to change from that master plan.
Yeah, if you want to come back. But
Am I right in saying, though, that the reserved matters application will be determined within the context of this potential decision, saying we think up to 110 can be accommodated with a buffer between those two, between the two bits? So if we were, you probably see where I'm going, you know, if we were concerned at this stage that quantum of development couldn't be provided in principle with appropriate mitigation measures, then now is the time for us to deal with that. And
yes.
Yes, yes, we are being asked to consider. I don't know if it's up. Is it up to or around 110?
Up to.
So it is very rare you get a reserved matter for fewer. So it's around. Oh, the policy says around 100, but the application is up to 110. So if you have concerns about quantum, then yes, you should raise them now, and yeah, that would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ellis, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think outline planning applications always tend to favour the developer rather than anyone else, but it doesn't give them carte blanche. And I think that all the caveats and conditions that officers have put on this application before development can start offers a high level of protection against the worries that members have. So I would favour approval of this application.
Thank you. So are you in effect moving the recommendation as per the report along with the revised conditions? Righty ho. Well, before we go any further with that, there are still a few other speakers who want to come in, but we've made the note that you're proposing to move that. But before we go on, I've got Councillor Mallender, Chaplin and Brown. So Councillor Mallender, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've been away for 4 years on this committee, and I'm sad to see that nothing's changed. So yes,
that's not a very nice comment.
No, I don't mean as far as the committee itself is concerned. I mean,
it's the complicated. I think you're referring to the complicated world of planning.
Yeah, the complicated world of planning has changed. Yes, that's what I mean.
Just clarifying that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, absolutely brilliantly chaired and supported by the officers. No problem with that whatsoever. What I do have a problem with is, as Councillor Edivine, the ward member, and Councillor Walker have stated, and others, that this is an outline planning application, and we've all seen these from 4 years ago and from the past, since I think 2006. I've seen this happen time and time again, that a lot of the conditions, this is what I want to ask, how much are those conditions absolutely going to be enforced on this plan? because a lot of them are guidelines and notes to applicant, which I'm sorry to say I've seen over and over again are completely ignored. It's only a guidance, it's only a note. I'm not going to do that. Even the 30% affordable housing, which is the Rushcliffe Borough Council policy, which is why it's there, even that has been objected to when it comes to full applications and lowered. But I am hopeful that the 30% affordable will take place should this be given permission. I am concerned that, and I don't know whether this is true, so my second question is it correct that, I know it's only an outline plan, but I dare say it will be the case, that the affordable housing appears to be nearest to the industrialised area? Is this the case? I'd like to know. Some residents have also noted that there's absolutely no mention of cycling whatsoever, either by the county council or by the applicant. Has this been taken into consideration, and will there be some sort of condition to do with that? Will there be a condition to have pedestrian crossings as well to make it safe for people on what I think several people have said is a dangerous junction in order to get to the bus stop? At the moment, it's a Kinch bus that goes there. I've caught it quite frequently. It's an hourly bus service. I've also noted, and I don't know whether this is true, so again, this is from a member of the public, that the traffic survey took place in August 2020. Now, that was the middle of COVID and also the school holidays. So there would have been less traffic about. So has there been a more recent and appropriate traffic survey that took place during a time when there weren't any COVID restrictions in place and it wasn't a school holiday? I've been discussing this with several people, and what we're very concerned about is also the wildlife. Again, will the conditions that are being laid down be followed, and if not, will enforcement occur? I'm concerned that the Wildlife Trust don't seem to think that they seem to think that there could be a detrimental effect on wildlife. And we can't guarantee that there isn't. It's interesting that actually what people look at as being what are classified as green belt sites, which are quite often farmland that is sprayed with pesticide and herbicide and very intensively farmed, is actually a poorer place for wildlife than a semi-urban site or even an urban site on a brownfield site. And even in this document, I see this is low quality scrub. Low quality scrub is actually, go onto the hook in Lady Bay and you'll see, marvelous for wildlife, particularly birds and invertebrates. So what is described as not being very good for wildlife is actually completely the opposite. So I'm very concerned about those kind of issues, and I would just like to see not what I've seen in the past, which is that if this is given permission, will it come back with not following the considerations that we've all raised and that we all want to see in place, and will enforcement take place if it doesn't? Thank you.
Thank you. Regards to the 30%, in this case, affordable and the location, again, I think we'll be told that will be detailed if it gets to the reserve matters stage. But if this is approved today, then we've got the 30% in the recommendations here. So I'm sure that if it came to a reserve matters committee, then someone will notice if there is any difference from that condition and suggestion, as indeed with the other conditions as well. I think it's fair to say that. But so the points about the transport, the cycling, and the 2020 traffic survey and the wildlife. What can we help with there, please?
Sorry, and the positioning of the affordable
Sorry, yes,
housing.
beg your pardon. Yes, and the position. I'm sorry, I meant to mention that. I have written it down.
It's all right.
But again, I'm sure we'll be told this, but again, this is indicative, and so that will, again, I think will be decided and approved and agreed at reserved matters point. But I do understand exactly what you're saying, because we have a tradition, well, not policy and tradition now of, in large developments where it's affordable housing, you don't sort of clump it all together, so it's not all obvious like it was perhaps back in the 60s and the 70s. Those days have gone, and in recent years there's a lot of developments around Rushcliffe where there's affordable housing mixed in with every other part of housing as well. So I would very much hope that will be the case of this. But sorry, I'm taking your time here. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, as you refer to, in any reserve matters application, we would look at the affordable housing and we would expect that to be what we call pepper potted within the site rather than large clusters, and that's something we would consult at reserve matters stage with strategic housing. Housing we would expect to be mixed within the site. Clearly, with this application, we have got that section 106 or draft section 106 30% legal requirement. Not aware from the indicative plans of indicative location of the affordable housing. From what I can see, it just appears to show the general housing area. In terms of the traffic survey, I've had a quick check, and we had an update letter submitted in March 2021. I'm just having a quick check of this. The original transport assessment was carried out in November 2019, so pre-COVID, and then the update letter was provided in March 2021.
Paragraph 67.
And then in terms of wildlife, just want to draw members' attention to condition 16, where we'd be seeking for an update to the wildlife ecology survey that's been carried out. But clearly we're looking for net gain on the site, biodiversity net gain, and landscaping, etc. will be part of reserve matters.
So the wildlife is covered there and will be covered by reserved matters. I think that's all the points from Councillor Mallender. Councillor Chaplin. Oh, sorry, have I forgotten something?
Cycling and zebra crossings, safe crossings for pedestrians. Sorry.
In terms of pedestrian crossings, there hasn't been a requirement identified by the Highways Department, so we haven't requested any changes for pedestrian crossings or additional crossings. I'm not sure in relation to cycling, you mentioned additional conditions, but I'm not sure what in particular you were requesting in that sense.
Well, again, I suppose it's more highways that there would need to be some sort of safe way of leaving the site and accessing. I mean, it's very poor anyway in that area, and provision in the dwellings themselves for.
I think I read something about that. We think there is reference to it somewhere in the report. We're just trying to find it.
So yeah, so in terms of inside the site, when we get to reserve matters, things like cycle storage and those issues will be picked up in design of the houses and their outdoor storage. There hasn't been a request via the Highways Department for any additional cycle routes, so they will have taken into consideration various ways of moving to and from the site. So highways don't just look at cars, they look at people and they look at cyclists and things like that, but there hasn't been a request from them as the consultee for any additional cycle routes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chaplin, please.
Thank you. I share Councillor Walker's concern about, was it quantum? I'm picking up the terminology there. The number of houses, and I was wondering whether that would be a reason to refuse the outline plan and ask for more details. Because looking at that, I know it's only an indicative plan, but that looks pretty crammed to me with 110 houses in. And if we were asking for a bigger buffer between the access road, where you've got lots of HGVs coming in and out, and the houses there, that means getting rid of some houses. I can't see how we could shuffle up and still have 110 houses in there and a buffer. So would we want, if we wanted to have a more detailed number, a fixed number less than 110, would that be a reason to say we refuse this outline permission?
I think the difficulty I could foresee is where's your evidence that it can't be fitted in. They've shown an indicative layout, and at present we don't have details of that buffer or how big it needs to be. So I would probably caution against, I would suggest members ought to think about a little bit more deeply about what that quantum means, which is the bit of it you potentially have concerns about, and what the material impact of that quantum is. So is it that you are concerned about amenity or density or those kinds of thoughts? So I would advise you to probably have maybe a bit more talk about that in detail, about what exactly you're refusing it on, if that's what you're minded to do, and how we're going to justify that, in terms of the reason for refusal.
It's a point of sort of justifying and then potentially defending.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Yeah, so that's why I asked the question. So if reserve matters come back and we felt that the buffer they were providing wasn't sufficient and they couldn't come up with an alternative with 110 houses, we could then insist it went to fewer houses at that point. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so
Yes,
for instance, if you came in at reserve matters and the noise survey said actually you need a 15-metre buffer, that potentially could reduce how many houses could fit on the site. So it is difficult because it's outline and it is only indicative, but at reserve matters those issues would come out and they'd be drawn out through all those additional surveys information that you would have to hand, or officers would have to hand at that point, and that would inform all those details of layout, distances from boundaries, what type of housing you have in those locations.
So again, reserve matters is probably the key on that. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to point out a few issues. I've got several reservations about this application, and I want to speak as a retired driving instructor in that very area. I know the road very well. What it doesn't show on that diagram there is the road that comes from Loughborough, comes down Bunny Hill, and there's a very sharp 50-mile-an-hour bend just before you get to the aggregate site. Quite often, traffic goes more than 50 miles an hour. Then we go up to the Goatham Road where the new access point is. I've driven hundreds of learner drivers around there, and believe me, it's a very short bend. and then the turn onto the A60. It's very, very busy. So I've got my reservations about the bus stop and agree with Councillor Mallender that to cross that road to access the bus to Loughborough is very dangerous. And a zebra crossing, I don't think could be adequate at the speed the traffic goes down there. I've got to agree with Councillor Edivine. I think we've got to forget this outline planning permission and go for full planning permission. And I just wondered if we've got material reasons using the access and the speed that road goes on. And also, let's not forget, looking into the future, Gotham Road is the preferred HGV route to British Gypsum, and it will be as well to the power station sites, the new Freeport. All the HGVs from the A60 will be going down that route. So the traffic survey done in 2021 will be completely out of date in a few years' time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Well, you as with any planning application, you can't make a decision on what might happen in the future with any other applications. You have to decide what's in front of us. So if a day comes when there is another application for whatever, wherever, it's at that application that any impact on the roads would be dealt with or discussed. And also, I suspect we're going to be told again that the highway transport officers have not pointed these out, and these are the highways people. But am I stepping on your toes again?
Can I just come back?
Come back, yeah.
I can still object on the grounds of the existing road as it is at the moment. From a personal point of view, I think both of those access routes are dangerous.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just making the point that we can't.
From a professional driving instructor's point of view, they are dangerous at the moment. But the only way that would go is if highways decided on Gotham Road to completely straighten that road out a little bit, and I can't see them doing that.
Points heard and understood. Thank you, Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some reservations. I see the noise, odour and smell. Was a survey done for flies? As I see on TV lately, that
England have taken a wicket by the sounds of it over here.
it should be turned off.
It's okay, don't worry. Can you just repeat that, because we were struggling to hear what you were saying. So if you move your microphone nearer as well.
I have some concerns. The odour, smells. Was there a survey for flies? As on TV late last week, there was a programme about housing next to a recycling place, and they were smothered in flies day and night. And I don't think a survey was done on that. I don't think private cars should use the aggregate entrance. There is enough planning been done by Rushcliffe for 100 houses to have one entrance. And I'm concerned there isn't any drawings or plans on what type of houses. Because I, as a Keyworth Parish Councillor, have done several large sites, and they always come with the type of housing, association housing, where they are, road, a truck going round the site, telling you where it can and cannot go, and there's none of this in this plan. Thank you, Chair.
Well, one of the reasons for that is, as you rightly say, it's an outline application.
Yes.
So at the reserved stage, if we get to that stage, that's when the precise details of the layout, types of houses, number of houses, how wide the roads are, what the displays are for dustbin lorries and all the rest of it. It's at that stage that comes into consideration, isn't it? But what about the point about the flies and the wild points?
Thank you, Chairman. I think there's 2 points really. We've consulted with our environmental health officers, and they've raised no concerns on that front. And also have to remember that the adjacent site is an aggregates processing site. It's processing the aggregate material. So we wouldn't really expect that to be a significant issue from that nature of use.
Okay, thank you. Does that help? The type of recycling, it's not your wet type of detritus type of materials, it's dry recycling.
I disagree. I disagree about the outline. There's a plan going in Keyworth and they have everything what I've said in the outline, and that's down to Barrett's. So if they can do it, this application can do it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else to come back on that? Probably not. Right, okay. Councillor Way.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to go back to the transport assessment a little bit. I think taking up Councillor Mallander's point about cycleways, somewhere in there was something mentioned about joining a cycleway, but I believe it was in Ruddington. And you've got quite a lot of busy A6 to access before you do that. And the crossing between the two bus stops is exceedingly dangerous on that road. I travel that road quite a lot. And the speed is astonishing, even though it's supposed to be 30 miles an hour. If those things can be fixed, I would like to see some sort of pedestrian access out onto the eastern side, onto the A60. At present, there isn't a footpath along there, but it would make the walk to the bus stops and to the primary school much easier and straightforward for people. And on the subject of primary schools, I'd like to know if there's enough school places to take the expected children from this estate, and also what will happen to the secondary school pupils, because in terms of bus services, there aren't any to Eastleigh or to Keyworth, which I'd imagine would be their destinations for secondary school places. And that similarly applies to the health centres.
There are various heads of terms and suggestions, aren't there, for the funding and contributions to schools, education, and health are in the report, and again will be finalised at the reserve matters stage. With regards to the crossing, etc., and bus stops, I've just spotted. Have a look at paragraph 64 and see what the Highways Authority says. Well, it says the Highway Authority did raise concerns regarding substandard footway along the A60 and clarified they would not seek new bus stop provision due to the lack of ability to provide safe crossing facilities at the location on a 50-limit road. And accordingly, that's where they then start asking for improvements to the existing bus stop. So the highways have observed that and those are their comments as well. Do you want to come back?
It's about reaching those bus stops from the site. As it is laid out now, you'd have to come out onto Gotham Lane, turn right. I've trouble with lefts and right. Turn right, and then left at the corner of the junction of the A60, and then it's a few hundred yards along there before you reach the bus stop.
I think they're widening the footpath. So
on Gotham Lane, as I understand it.
Can you just help us with that?
Thank you, Chairman. So, yes, so requirements set out in condition 20 is the widening of the footway along Gotham Lane. Highways did not want to encourage pedestrian use of the A60 or an informal crossing point at that point. So therefore, the focus has been on footway improvements along the Gotham Lane instead.
And also have a read of paragraph 65. The widening of the footways on south side of Gotham Lane, widening the existing narrow footpath to 2 metres linking Gotham Lane to the A60, widening the footway to 2 metres width on the west side of the A60. So they have picked up on, or they appear to have picked up on those, the access.
It means quite an extended walk if you're in the bottom right hand side there, all the way through this stage and all the way back. So you'd be going around 3 sides of the square to get to where you want to go to.
But again, I think we'll be told that that is just an indicative layout. Am I right? Or there's anything else you can add to that?
Thank you, Chairman. So I think if we just go back to the very beginning when this was an allocated site and going through examination, we look at the inspector's examination report, paragraph 137. That report highlights essentially the fact that it is maybe a more limited site in terms of its accessibility by car modes of transport. However, there is definitely a balancing exercise to be had in terms of the benefits of bringing forward a previously developed land. So that has been a consideration from the very start, that balancing exercise.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Walker, yes, I'll come back.
Thanks, Chair. We get paragraph 50. Talk about principle of development, and can I just check what those 4 bullet points there, are they lifted directly from policy 23 of the local plan? A being the southern half of the site must be safeguarded and developed for employment purposes.
I think they are, yes. Yeah, they are taken from the local plan.
Yes. Okay, so I suppose that brings us back to one of the points that we've talked about before. I've been asked to cast our minds more to around quantum. So I think I'd be right in saying then, in order for the development to comply with policy 23, paragraph A, the southern half of the site must be safeguarded for employment use. Okay, ergo, the principle here of up to 110 can only be on the northern half of the site. So we need to determine whether we think we can get up to 110 houses on the northern half of the site. Which is quite different from the northern half of the site. If we look at this, admittedly indicative, but we need to consider whether that's possible, bearing in mind the 110 there are on the northern.
Understood.
Yeah. 5/6 of the site.
Yeah. Emily.
Yes, I could see where you were going. Yeah. So yes, quite right. Councillors have talked a lot about quantum and being concerned about that. If you were minded to put a motion forward that the quantum was too great, you could word it to the effect that it covers more than half the site or has not been adequately demonstrated that the southern half, if you want to put emphasis on that word half of the site, could be safeguarded for employment. I don't know if that's sort of along what you were. Yes.
Okay, right. Councillor Calvert.
Just a final comment, I hope, on the quantum issue. There's always a danger that if you reduce the number of houses, that the applicant might come back and say, I've now got a viability problem. And then the consequence of that can, as past applications have resulted in the affordable housing requirement being waived. So I'm just flagging that one up for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. Right, I think we've had a good discussion on this, and there's a lot to take in. This is an important application. I don't sense anyone else wanted to come in with any questions on this. We've had the recommendation as per the report and the amended conditions moved by Councillor Ellis. Is there a seconder for that recommendation, please? Okay, well, I'm happy to second that. So if Councillor Ellis moved and I'll second it. We need to come to a vote now then, please. So we've got the recommendation moved and seconded. Show of hands, those in favour. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I need to clarify with the amended conditions as on the separate sheet. So we're clear on that, aren't we? So it's moved and seconded. Need a show of hands, please. Those in favour, please show. Sorry.
Sorry, can we just confirm whether we vote for or against?
Yes, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm just doing now. I'm just asking people, the recommendation as per the report has been moved and seconded, and the recommendation is to approve. And as per the report with the revised recommendations and conditions. So that's what we're going to vote on now. Sorry, I should have made that clear. So those in favour of approval, please show. Oh, right. So, okay, those against. Righty-ho, thank you. Well, that's plainly refused. So what we need to do now is somebody needs to come up with an alternative recommendation to move and second to reflect what we've just voted on. So who would like to do that? Along with material planning reasons and all the necessary conditions that goes with that. Councillor Walker, are you indicating to speak?
Yeah. So my concern is that the application is not in line with local plan part 2 policy 23A, namely that the southern half of the site must be safeguarded and developed for employment purposes. I don't think that this application demonstrates that the southern half of the site has been safeguarded, nor that the quantum of development sought could be accommodated within the northern half of the site.
We're just rapidly making notes because we have to word it in such a way, in an appropriate way. So I think we hear what you're saying, but it has to be written in such a way of planning speak, so to speak. So just bear with us a moment on that. Yeah. We're just coming up with yes.
So yes, yeah, I can take notes from that and take look back at YouTube, but it's not been adequately demonstrated that the quantum of development on the northern site. I would just my only caution would be we have said in the allocation that it could be around 100. If you take off 10 dwellings, does it make that much difference? It is an allocated site. So my last shot across the bows is just to remind you all that has been allocated for around 100 already.
And your advice is obviously extremely welcome to committee, Mrs. Doll, at all times. I suppose we come back to, don't we, that whilst it has been allocated, it's been allocated on the basis of the southern half for employment. So for us lay people, if I was getting my crayons out and drawing an outline master plan, or even for that matter, a detailed application, the first thing that I'd do is draw a line down the middle from east to west. So then I know what I've got to play with from a housing perspective.
We can put a reason in on those lines, yes. Councillor Mallender.
I was just going to second the proposal, and also I have policy 23 in front of me now, finally. And it does clearly say that the development will be subject to the following requirements. The southern half of the site must be safeguarded and developed for employment purposes, B1, B2, B8. It also says, once occupied, the amenity of residents should not be adversely affected by noise, odour or dust resulting from the activities of the neighbouring employment site. And I don't think, since the neighbouring employment site itself have sent in an objection, whether we also could possibly use that one. And it does also say loss of any priority habitats, including woodland and hedgerow. And I believe there is, I don't think that we have been assured that isn't going to take place. And it should also be consistent with other relevant policies in the local plan, which includes sustainable transport. So since there's no mention of cycling or any real effort to help people catch the bus, then that's another one, I think. Thank you.
So are you in effect changing that motion, then, or is it your?
Well, no, I just thought there were other. I mean, I know that in the past we've sort of had a sort of outline, and officers have very kindly helped us in expanding on it. So I mean, it was just a suggestion if you wanted to put something else in. Yeah.
Well, so I would need a clear decision from members today which bits of the policy you would like to refuse it on, because the employment safeguarding is sort of different to than the amenity issues. You can include both if you feel it's not been adequately demonstrated that the amenity would be protected. So I know you've talked particularly about that issue, so you could add that if you were minded to do that, and we could have a second reason for refusal on that basis. It would be for councillors to decide.
Right. What would you like to do?
We'll just leave it as the first one, then we decide.
Are we staying with the first?
It's probably with reserve matters. The second one could be.
So that would be clear, I think.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. Thank you.
That's okay to do it on the.
Yeah, do you want me to?
Yes, if you could. I think we just need to read it out.
I'll summarise what I think you told
so
me.
everyone's sure what we're deciding and voting on.
So I think what you are going to decide on, and Councillor Walker can correct me if I'm wrong, is words to the effect that it's not been adequately demonstrated that the quantity of residential development can be accommodated on the northern half of the site, whilst safeguarding the southern part of the site for employment, and it's therefore contrary to Policy 23 Part A.
Does that sound right to you, and are you happy with that? Okay, right. So that's the new recommendation we've got in front of us, to refuse permission for those reasons. So we need to. Sorry, are you coming? Right. Is to refuse permission for those reasons, and so we need to take a vote on that. So show of hands in favour of the new recommendation to refuse for those reasons, please. Show. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Is that 3? Oh, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's that. I think that's 8. And those against? 2. Okay. So permission is refused for reasons given. So thank you for your input and discussion on that. Big application, and as all applications are important, and decision taken. So I'll just wait a moment because I suspect some members of the public might want to be leaving. So I assume it's there. Thank you. So musical chairs now, just moving. Oh, right. So we're in place. So one thing you learn from this is you can never predict what's going to happen in a planning committee. So it's so that's. I know it took a long time, but it's important that we get to a decision. Right. Our next application is land west of Main Street, Thoroton. This is the erection of a new dwelling with access. And Mr. Mountain, you're going to talk through this, please.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, good afternoon, Chair, members of the public. As the Chair has just highlighted, application for a single new dwelling, two-storey property on land west of Main Street in Thoroton. It's a two-storey dwelling with an attached single garage, approximately 40 metres back from the Main Street in Thoroton. So Main Street running through Torrington has highlighted a pair of semi-detached properties to the front, and then we have this parcel of land to the rear of the properties. The application site is currently a grass paddock, relatively flat, access from a grass driveway or grass track up to the site. Within the Thorrington Conservation Area, with a public right-of-way running on the southern boundary. I won't seek to rehearse the full policy position that's detailed in the officer report to committee. However, it is considered that the site, given its location, forms backland development within the main built-up area of Thorrington, and as such accords with policy 11 of the local plan part 2, which is in relation to housing developments on unallocated sites within settlements. From driving through Thorrington and from meeting local residents on the site, it's noted there have been a lot of new developments in Thorrington in recent years. As you can highlight on up here, we've got new residential development that is in the process of being built out. We've got new residential development here that has been completed. We've got 3 new properties that have also been completed. And in the last couple of months, we've got a new property just out of shot back here that's just been approved permission for another backland plot. Careful consideration has obviously been given to relationships with neighbouring properties. I'll flick through a few of the photos. So this plan shows the development site in relation to the neighbouring properties. We've got properties to the south, properties to the southeast, properties to the northeast, and properties to the northwest, and also over to the west as well. And then this is just a grass paddock, which you can see there. The orientation on the plan has just been changed around ever so slightly. So we've got a couple of photos that show the site in context. So this is from Main Street in Thorrington. This is the footpath, which has been separated off from the site. You can just see the new property sort of nestled on the left-hand side in that photo. This one has got the access up to the site, existing properties, approximately 1940s, 1950s properties roughly. This shows the site. These are the new dwellings. This is gables on Main Street, Thorrington. These over here, if you can see them on the mouse. This is an old, it was a farm conversion, Thorrington Farm, and these were new build properties that sit to the rear of the site. These photos taken from neighbouring gardens. This is Rota Adler, which is sort of slung further to the north of the site. This shows the site in context with properties to the front of the site. A couple more photos, another neighbouring garden. This is the property that sits immediately to the front, the J's. That just shows a summer house that sits on the boundary. The garage for the property would roughly sit alongside where the summer house is. We'll show that in a second. And this is the gables, another new property which flanks the site. There we go, this is site in context. In relation to the design and impact on the conservation area, officers have worked hard with the applicants to try and seek to get a development which we consider to be appropriate within the conservation area. We've listened to residents' concerns. We've got the applicant to reduce the scale of the property. The mass of the property has been reduced. The footprint of the property has been reduced. We've also looked at considerations in relation to what has been identified as a key view within the conservation area, which is the view looking up here from Main Street, Thorrington. And as you'll be able to see as part of the plans, we consider that that view largely remains as existing. The applicant has put forward a scheme whereby the access will be hard surfaced initially to overcome highway concerns, but then it will remain as a grass track with stone for tyre tracks, which the conservation officer has had due consideration of and is comfortable as part of their comments back to officers and back to members of the committee. So in summary, none of the technical quantities are objecting to the application. Indeed, the outgoing ward member for the area did raise no objection. The location of the proposed development is considered to be within the main built-up area of the village. The design is considered to be in keeping with the character of the village and character of the conservation area. The relationship with neighbouring built form is considered to be acceptable. As such, we consider future occupiers and existing residents would have a good standard of amenity. and it provide a good quality future home for a future occupier. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there. And the recommendation is as to approve as per the officer's report with a number of conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mountain. We have speakers on this item as well. We have two speakers, and the first one is Claire Garton, who is the applicant. So thank you for your patience, everyone, on the first application. It was quite a busy agenda. So you have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. As soon as you're ready, just press the right-hand button and the red light will come on.
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors. I'm Claire Garton. I'm the applicant and I'm also the owner of the application site. I live in Thoroton and I have done the majority of my life. I live in the original family home with my mother and my 18-month-old son. I hope to now be able to build my own home in Thoroton for my son and for myself and my child. As part of my statement to you, I would like to address some of the public comments of objection. First, the objection raised the most is that the application site should be an orchard, gifted to the village by the applicant of a previous planning application, number 1300369. That planning application was never implemented. Therefore, the said orchard never existed, nor was the land or any orchard ever proposed to be gifted to the village, which has been confirmed by the previous owner of the land. Secondly, and which the committee may consider more relevant, is that it has been suggested that the application is non-compliant with the development plan, namely Local Plan Part 1, Core Strategy Policy 3. It is further suggested that Core Strategy Policy 3 requires demonstrable local needs, which councillors, you will know, of course, it does not. The law requires that decisions on planning applications has to be taken in accordance with the development plan and other material considerations, such as the NPPF. Core Strategy Policy 3 allocates strategic sites for development, but still allows for development in other villages for local needs. Local needs is defined within Local Plan Part 2, paragraph 3.10 as small-scale infill development, which is considered to be development of small gaps within the existing built fabric of the village. This application site is a small-scale infill site within the existing built fabric of Thoroton. As such, the application site does accord with the development plan, Core Strategy Policy 3, and this is confirmed by the planning officers in their recommendation for approval. Smaller villages such as Thoroton are renowned for becoming populated by older residents. Thoroton needs the opportunity to grow and sustain a vibrant local community, securing a sustainable future for the village. Previous recent development in Thoroton has been well supported by the village. I note that a number of the objectors to this application were strong supporters of the recent Thoroton farm development of the 8 dwellings, and that some now actually live in them. Thirdly, there have also been a number of comments as to the size, layout, impact on neighbours and impact on the conservation area. The application site is backland development in a position where development in depth already exists. Therefore, it will not alter the character of the area, and there are at least 23 examples of backland development throughout Thoroton. Councillors, you will know that the Conservation Area Officer does not object to the application and confirms that it does not block any important views or vistas. Taking the officer's other comments into account, since the application was first submitted, the access drive has been softened to gravel tracks, and it is not considered that one dwelling will cause excessive noise or traffic or congestion. This application is for one family home, and the architectural design is of high quality and complements the existing character of the conservation village. Since the initial application was made, revised plans have been submitted, having worked with the allocated planning officer to ensure the dwelling fits suitably within the site. The mass and height of the dwelling has been considerably reduced in order to protect the amenities of the neighbouring properties. The building is now subservient to the frontage properties, the Jays and Lilac Cottage, as well as the gables. The proposed dwelling now only has a total footprint of 137 square metres, with suitable access and ample amenity space. The site itself totals 1,103 square metres, which is just over a quarter of an acre. The dwelling, therefore, only amounts to near 12% of the total application site. Additionally, there are no windows. Additionally, there are no windows on the side elevation towards the Jays and Lilac Cottage, preventing overlooking a loss of privacy. And the dwelling is positioned to the west of the Jays and Lilac Cottage and north of the gables, preventing loss of light. The planning officers have made a very firm recommendation for approval, and by way of conclusion, I invite you councillors to grant the planning application in full. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garton. That's just in your 5 minutes as well. So thank you very much.
Turn the button off.
Yes, please. Yeah. And we have another speaker, Mr. Saville, Richard Saville, who is against the application. So, you know, I'm sure you've worked out how it all works now, up to 5 minutes. Okay. I feel the need to tell people how it works, just in case well, you understand. So, yeah, up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I represent those whose objections are summarised at paragraph 15 of the committee report. The key objection is non-compliance with core strategy policy 3 under criterion 2 brackets B brackets 8. This states that only housing, and I quote, solely to meet local housing needs will be permitted in other villages such as Thoroton. Neither the core strategy nor the Part 2 local plan defines what constitutes local housing needs. Paragraph 3.10 of the Part 2 local plan only advises a type of site characteristics where local housing needs housing can be developed. It provides no guidance as to how local housing needs itself is defined. The descriptor, local housing needs, uniquely differentiates the housing role to be provided in other villages by comparison with the other settlement hierarchy tiers of policy CS3. Criterion A from policy 11 of the Part 2 local plan simply confirms the scale and location of such housing needs sites. The need for housing must be in accordance with policy CS3. Policy 11 does not clarify what constitutes local housing needs. It is therefore clear that in combination with policy CS3, paragraph 2, paragraph B, paragraph 8, any housing also seeking to conform with Part 2 local plan policy 11 within other villages must provide housing solely to meet local housing needs. The only available definition of local housing need is provided within the NPPF framework glossary, where it confirms it is a requirement to meet the housing needs of the borough as a whole. The council has a requirement to provide a 5-year housing land supply to meet the local housing needs within the borough. The most recent annual monitoring report confirms an 8.9-year housing land supply. There is therefore consequently 78%, and I state 78%, more housing land currently available in the borough than required to meet the 5-year housing land supply. There is therefore no current unmet local housing need within Rushcliffe. Additionally, there has been a 40% increase in the number of houses in Thoroton. Self-evidently, this quantity of new housing has met any local housing needs within Thoroton. Paragraph 12E and G of your officer report confirms the harm caused by the application to the view along the application access, an adjoining right of way identified in the revised conservation area appraisal. This results in a strong statutory presumption against granting planning permission at section 72 of the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990. The correct test to be applied by the Planning Committee is set out at paragraph 202 of the NPPF and not 208 as stated in the officer report. This test requires the identified less than substantial harm to be weighed against the public benefit that would arise from the planning application proposal. I've just demonstrated that there is no local housing needs requirement in either the borough as a whole or Thoroton specifically. Consequently, no wider public benefit would be achieved. No local housing need would be met through granting permission for this application. Consequently, the Section 72 presumption against granting planning permission is triggered and also directs the application should be refused. Previously, planning permission was granted in 2013 for the applicant's mother for 3 dwellings west of the application site. Condition 6 of that planning permission provided for this current planning application site to become an orchard for the benefit of the village. The village was let down on that occasion by the Borough Council
30 seconds.
because the orchard was not secured via a Section 106 agreement. Her daughter now seeks planning permission on this land, but there is no local housing need, as required by policy CS3 to justify granting permission, and her mother recently secured planning permission for another dwelling elsewhere on Main Street on the 30th of May 2023, where her daughter currently resides. Accordingly, we'd ask the village not to be let down and to refuse. Thank you. Sorry, overrun.
No, that's okay. Just 5 minutes. That's okay. That's fine. So thank you for that. And we also have the ward member, Councillor Grocock. Welcome. This is your first meeting, I think, isn't it?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So, well, I don't need to tell you what to do.
I've managed to work it. It's
Yes,
on.
okay.
It's on, and the red lights are shining. So thank you. Having considered the application carefully and taking guidance from both the borough's planning officer and the planning consultant representing the local community, it would seem to me that the critical factor is the interpretation of local housing needs with respect to the role of other villages within the borough in helping to meet that need. I am not opposed to the principle of rural development and completely understand that other villages do have a role to play in meeting local needs. I also understand that the applicant has made efforts to mitigate the loss of amenity to neighbouring properties that this development would cause. Nevertheless, as pointed out by the community representative, there is still a loss of amenity to both neighbouring properties and users of the public right-of-way without any mitigating public benefit. My ward is a rural ward containing 7 parishes. Thoroton is the 3rd smallest of these parishes. There are no local facilities within the parish. No shop, no pub, no school, no community centre or village hall. Public transport is limited to 2 bus services, one of which stops twice, the other just once, and both of which cease in the middle of the afternoon. The settlement is based on a single linear road, which is in a pretty poor state of disrepair. Whilst the borough does have a 5-year housing supply, I do acknowledge, as I have said, that other villages have a role to play. But given the lack of local services and the 40% increase in housing in Thoroton over the last 15 years, much of it which was approved when the borough did not have a 5-year housing supply, it is self-evident that Thoroton has more than played its part in meeting the local housing needs of the borough as a whole, the parish itself and surrounding parishes within my ward and neighbouring wards. An argument might be made that it is only one dwelling, but when does one dwelling and the resulting loss of amenity become too much? I believe that point has been reached, and therefore my interpretation of local housing needs with respect to the parish of Thoroton and the borough aligns with the sentiments expressed and positioned outlined by the representative of the local community. In summary, I ask members to consider that on balance, this proposed development is not sustainable and the application should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well within 5 minutes. So we have no more speakers, public speakers on this item. So just to very briefly summarise, we heard from Ms. Garton, who is the applicant, who gave us history of the site and her personal family details, and considers that it can be classed as small scale infill type of development, and referred to examples of other developments and comments made by conservation officers. We heard from Mr. Saville, who is an objector, considers that local housing needs and policy CS3s and other policies are applicable on this, and doesn't consider there is a need or justification for the development or for the house. And similarly, Councillor Grocock referred to the local housing need, although he's not generally opposed to new development, but he feels that Thoroton has well up to need, and referred to loss of public amenity and transport issues. I think those are the main points covered. Can we come back on any of those, please?
Yeah, happy to come back. Thank you, Chair. I think we'll start on need for dwellings in other villages. Very helpfully, this has been covered on page 6 of the officer's report in quite detail by the policy manager for the Borough Council. Clearly, the application has been in for some time. We've had discussions with the applicants, we've had discussions with neighbours, we've had discussions with a local ward member. So we took it upon ourselves to get comments from the planning manager to get a better understanding on whether a new dwelling in another village such as Thoroton with limited resources is considered to be acceptable. And as you can see by paragraph C on page 6 from the policy manager, his comments are that if a suitable single dwelling and other small-scale infill sites within the borough's other villages were not to continue to come forward because, in this instance, it was deemed they did not form part of meeting a local housing need, then this would fundamentally undermine maintaining sufficient ongoing housing land supply as required by the NPPF and meeting the borough-wide housing targets. It should be noted that the borough's latest 5-year housing land supply calculation incorporates an allowance for windfall development on small sites within other villages. This is one of the reasons why an argument that small infill sites in other villages are not required because Rushcliffe can currently demonstrate that it has in excess of 5-year housing land supply. Therefore, this is totally without merit. So basically what he's saying is that consideration of sites within other villages such as Thoroton, fundamentally, if it's within the main built-up area, they form part of the windfall housing for the borough. So as officers, we consider this in principle to be an acceptable site for further housing. Whilst it's noted that Thoroton has had a lot of development, that doesn't predicate the bringing forward of a further single dwelling within the main built-up area of Thoroton. I'll move to the points raised about harm to the view within the conservation area. The conservation area appraisal that's currently ongoing, which is likely to be adopted in the coming months. They just need to go through an advertising process in the London Gazetteer, I understand. Does highlight the view up the lane or up the grass track as being an important view within the conservation area. And as rightly raised by the conservation officer, he does raise that development could, what page are we on? Page 4. Development could raise a degree of harm to the conservation area. But then in paragraph H, he then identifies that my initial comments were that a hard surface driveway would alter the rural nature of the view, alter the rural nature of this view in a way which would cause harm to the value of that key view. I can see from plans now submitted that a much softer approach to surfacing, which as the applicant had allayed has been discussed and agreed, to retain crushed grass, crushed stone, etc. for the wheel tracks for the majority of the length of the route, with only the section nearest the highway and turning head, would result in a more satisfactory impact in relation to the conservation area. It then goes on to say, sort of summarise, as such, I would not maintain an objection to the amended scheme, and I'm satisfied that this would serve to avoid causing harm to the conservation area as a designated heritage asset. That's covered on the following page at point J. Point raised regarding the orchard. There was a outline application, application for the 3 houses to the front of the site, which did include this site as a potential orchard for the village. There was then a follow-on application in 2015 where revisions were made to the design of these properties. This was then altered to a grass paddock. At no point did officers request that this was put forward as an orchard or request that it was put forward as a grass paddock. This was something that the applicant did at that point in time. Whilst it is clearly beneficial to Thoroton to have an orchard or a grass paddock, it was never secured by 106, never secured by legal agreement, never secured to be brought forward as a condition. And therefore, as officers, we don't consider that previous decisions on neighbouring sites would predicate the ability to bring forward an application for a dwelling on this site. Don't think I've got anything else. Yeah, I think that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's covered the main points, but obviously members will no doubt have observations and comments and questions. So we can open it up now to discussion. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Councillor Eddie Bean.
Press the right button. Yeah, I think you've actually covered most of the points I was going to raise. But so, yeah, one thing that was mentioned in one of the presentations was Section 106 money. You'd never get that for 3 dwellings anyway, would you? And again, local housing need. In fact, I represent a ward that's got many small villages, and an infill is an acceptable form of development. And then I think there was another comment made about the fact that Thoroton is a single linear village. Well, that clearly isn't anymore, because there's a lot of backfill, and this certainly doesn't push outside the village ribbon as it now exists. So I think those are the comments that my initial observations on this.
Okay, thank you. Probably no need to come back on that, but Councillor Calvert.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 16G is the conclusion of the borough's policy officer, and I agree entirely with his comment, which says whether the proposal complies in principle with the adopted local plan rests on whether the site is located within the built-up area. So I tried to dig around to see how the built-up area was defined, and there's a set of maps in LPP2 for many villages, but I couldn't find one for Thoroton, probably because of the size of the village, I expect. So it left me questioning, really, was it in the built-up area or not? And particularly because of this issue of the key view, which is something that is going to be defined, I think, as you said, in a few weeks or months. Again, from the photos, the key view is to me looks very important in terms of the open countryside. I'm aware of the fact that the driveway that would be proposed would be softened a bit, but I have a query about parked cars at the other end, and whether with the development you might have parked cars which could affect that view in the future, and if there was any way of controlling that. Thank you.
So yes, so for example, we're in the curtilage behind the property, that type of thing. Yeah. Can we offer any advice on that?
Thank you, Chair. We couldn't control that they would not park on the driveway up, but they have provided sufficient space in front of the garage to park, I think, at least 3 to 4 cars in front of the garage, and this would tuck around the corner of the lane, so that wouldn't be visible in the view up the lane. So you've got a single garage, and then you have space for, I believe, 4 vehicles to the front of that. So I'm fairly sure that any views you would see would be fairly limited. And also of interest is this plan, which doesn't probably replicate particularly well overhead, but this basically shows that this is the lane up. This is the property with a ridge height up here. These are the 2 properties that sit to the front of the site. So this is basically trying to illustrate that the reality of views from Main Street of the site are going to be fairly limited, because they're going to be hidden by the mass of the properties that sit to the front of them. We've got a difference in ridge height between the properties at the front of the site and the properties at the rear of the site of about 0.5 metre. And we've got a separation distance for the property that's proposed of about 45 metres from Main Street. So officers consider that any views are going to be limited, and impact therefore on that view again is going to be limited. Thank you.
Is that helpful? Yeah. Good. Okay, thank you. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. This business about local need seems to be an ill-defined and somewhat nebulous concept. Very simplistically, I would say that if someone wants to build and buy a house in a location, that indicates some kind of local need. And at the risk of being shot down again, I think officers have done a very good job on this, and I would move officers' recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. No, you're not going to be shot down, don't worry. We don't do that sort of thing. So thank you for that. Does anyone else have any comments, or are we getting ready for... Oh, Councillor Wells. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On Sunday, I personally walked the site of this proposal. I walked up the small little lane, where the house is going to go, and the hedge is such a height you wouldn't see the cars anyway. And I second Councillor Ellis's move. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wells. Right, I think we've probably covered the main points on here, and both in those happy and those not so happy. It's probably nothing else to add, really. I think we've had the we've discussed it, and we've had the recommendations moved as in the report, moved and seconded. So unless there's anyone else wishing to raise any comments or queries, I think we'll make a decision on this one. So, Councillor Mallender.
Don't worry, I'm not going to. I was thinking of seconding.
You say what you want.
I was just. Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that the footpaths officer from the County Council does ask that there's a note to an applicant about protecting the footpath, but I can't see one. So could that be added, please?
It will be added.
Right. Lovely.
Yes.
Thank you. That was
well spotted. Righty-ho. So thank you, Councillor Mallender, for that. And so thank you, Councillor Ellis and Wells and colleagues. So let's make a decision on this. Can we have a show of hands in favour of the recommendation to approve? And I think that's unanimous. We just for the record, no objections and no abstentions. So, yep. So permission is granted as per the report, along with the confirm the extra condition. Yes, I've just had a whisper here that we've been sitting here now for just over 2 hours. I suspect people might just want to stretch their legs for about 5 minutes, if that's all right. So with your permission, we'll adjourn. Shall we aim to get back for 4:45? Yeah, please. Thank you. we ready? Are we ready?
Where's your gavel?
Okay, thank you everyone for your patience, and it's 4:45, so we'll start the meeting. We'll commence the meeting or continue the meeting. Oh, sorry, we're missing a member. Sorry. I'll blame the specs. Sorry, Councillor Calvert. I don't. It's just blame the chairman. Right, I think we're all back now, so we'll go on to our final application, which is Farley Cottage, Clifton Lane, Ruddington, and this is the extension and external alterations to the ancillary access building. And who's doing this? It's sorry, I've just forgot who was doing this. It's Ms. Thompson's doing this application for us. So over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, members. So, as the Chairman has said, this application is for Farley Cottage, Clifton Lane in Ruddington. The application relates to an annex which is located in the northeast of the main dwelling. The annex is currently a 2-bedroomed annex, and the proposed application seeks permission for a single-storey side extension to the annex to create further accommodation at ground floor. So it would result in a 3-bedroomed annex with a bathroom at ground floor level. So just walking you through the photo. So this is a photograph of the front of the annex. You can see from this photograph that the annex has been subject to a conservatory extension. And then this is a photograph of this, also of the front, showing sort of a hard standing area in connection with the annex building. This photograph of the side nearest to the main dwelling, and this is where the proposed side extension would be located. That's another photograph of the side. This is a photograph of the rear of the annex building, again of the rear. This is a photograph showing the side, so looking from the north, so the rear of the residential curtilage towards the annex. And this is showing the other side of the annex with the conservatory extension. And you can see here that part of the curtilage has been separated off in connection with the annex. This plan shows where the single-storey extension will be located. And you can see here that the current annex has a lounge, conservatory, kitchen at ground floor level, under bathroom at ground floor level, and then 2 bedrooms at upstairs level. And then the current application seeks to increase the level of accommodation, so it would be result in a 3-bedroomed annex with an extra bathroom at ground floor level. So the main consideration for this application is the impact to the green belt. When considering applications within the green belt, you've got to consider 3 things really. The first is whether the development would constitute inappropriate development within the green belt. Second is the impact to the openness of the green belt. And then finally, you've got to consider whether there are any very special circumstances that exist that would outweigh any harm that's caused towards the green belt. So in terms of whether the development would constitute inappropriate development, national planning policy states that inappropriate development by definition is harmful within the green belt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. It also states that substantial weight needs to be given to any harm to the green belt. Paragraph 149 of national planning policy sets out exceptions to inappropriate development. And one of these exceptions is extensions to buildings as long as it isn't a disproportionate addition to the original building. There is no definition of what is or isn't disproportionate within national policy, but as a general rule of thumb, Rushcliffe Borough Council have accepted up to 50% volume increase of original buildings in the past. The current proposal, along with the previous conservatory extension, would seek to increase the volume of the building by approximately 45%. But I'd like to reiterate that this is not a sole determining factor as to whether an extension would be disproportionate to the original building. We've also got to look at the footprint, the scale, the design, and the resulting accommodation. Officers consider that the resulting accommodation, which would result in a 3-bedroomed annex, would be read as a separate planning unit and would be capable of being lived in separately from the main dwelling. Annexes are intended to be subservient to the host dwelling, and they are also supposed to rely on the host dwelling. And you can see here that a 3-bedroomed property with living room, a sunroom, a kitchen, 2 bathrooms downstairs could be lived in separately to the host dwelling. So coming on to the next point regarding openness and the impact to the openness of the green belt, we have to look at it in visual and spatial terms. Officers consider that in visual terms, limited impact. The proposed development would cause limited impact to the openness, but spatially, again, it would read as a separate dwelling within the green belt and would not conform with paragraph 138 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which sets out the purposes of including land within the green belt. Finally, we come on to very special circumstances. It's noted that the applicant has provided information that the annex extension is needed in order to support the care of an elderly couple relative. And whilst officers are sympathetic to this personal circumstance, it's clearly shown within case law that personal circumstances very rarely are accepted as very special circumstances to outweigh the harm within the green belt. Personal circumstances are temporary, and harm to the green belt in built form has a permanence. The applicant also hasn't demonstrated throughout the application that alternative options do not exist that would not harm the green belt, such as internal reconfiguration of the existing accommodation within the annex, or the possibility of a downstairs bedroom within the annex as well. There are many appeal examples that also demonstrate that personal circumstances are not considered to amount to very special circumstances within the green belt. One of which, an example, is an appeal from 2017 on Floorforth Lane that also proposed an annex building for an elderly relative, and the inspectorate found that this did not amount to very special circumstances to outweigh the harm to the green belt. Due to these reasons, officers consider that the proposal would cause harm to the green belt, and national planning policy states that substantial weight should be applied to any harm within the green belt, and no very special circumstances exist to outweigh the harm caused, and the application is before committee with a recommendation of refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Thompson. And we have speakers on this item. So first of all, the applicant, Mr Eleanor. And thank you for your patience through the other items we've had this afternoon. And so you will have seen you have up to 5 minutes to speak to the committee. As soon as you're ready, press the right-hand button.
So good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today in support of our planning application to extend and remodel Farley Cottage. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to digest the PowerPoint document that I provided online yesterday. I've lived in Rushcliffe for 11 years and at Farley for the last 2 years with my wife and children. We fell in love with Farley because it's a family home. Farley Cottage is annexed to our house. It's great for the occasional overnight stay, but not to live in. The stairs are steep, there's no bathroom upstairs, and the roof over the loft bedrooms prevents guests from standing up straight other than in the very centre of the rooms. My 90-year-old father, Jeff, who is here today, and his 82-year-old wife, Mo, who is not well enough to join us, currently live in Belper. They've always maintained independence. However, more recently, on multiple occasions, they have needed support from us on short notice. My wife and I both work full-time and have 2 children at Rushcliffe School. We have busy lives. It is difficult to provide care for our parents from a distance. They currently live in a 4-bedroom house. It's become overwhelming to maintain and navigate for them. And my father has increasing mobility issues. My stepmother is struggling with her eyesight and has the early signs of dementia. My father has become her carer. And whilst he is reluctant to admit it, I can see that he no longer coped with his role. In March this year, my father asked if he and his wife could move into our annex. It was a big step for him. He's a very, very proud man. We consulted with experts and we deliberately chose a modest extension with some internal remodelling to make it accessible for my parents whilst continuing to be ancillary to our home. This is not a veiled attempt to upgrade the annex with a view to splitting the land and selling the annex as a separate dwelling later, and nowhere in our application we're requesting to do this. We've only lived in Farley for 2 years, the children are still young, we love our home, we don't want strangers living in our garden. We feel that it would be unfair for such a speculative assumption to be the reason for blocking our planning application at this stage. We are aware that permission was previously granted to convert the cottage to an ancillary dwelling. Unfortunately, the current design does not fulfil this need. We are seeking permission now to make better use of the existing asset and fulfil the permission that was previously granted. The proposed extension to the annex is not visible from any local roads, footpaths, fields, or neighbours' houses. We spoke to our neighbours prior to the submission of the application. They were extremely supportive. There were also no objections from anywhere else to our application. We acknowledge that the property is in Greenbelt. However, we believe that any reasonable assessment of our application would find that there would be no harm or detriment to the Greenbelt itself, no interference with anyone's enjoyment of it, or that granting this permission would be inconsistent with the purpose for which this land is included in the Greenbelt. Also, if our application is approved, there will be no material increase to traffic from our property to Clifton Lane. My sisters live over 2 hours away, and our father cannot provide suitable accommodation for my parents. However, if our father were to move to the annex, they could support us more readily. My parents do not want to be a burden on us or the state. They do not want to go into a care home or live in our house. It is not suitable for their needs and ours. The proposed extension to the annex is the best option for us all. It will allow us to provide them with a safe environment and the emotional and physical care they need, while still maintaining independence. Other options, such as bungalows or sheltered accommodation, have been considered but are oversubscribed, overpriced, or just unavailable or unsuitable. The recommendation of the case officer to refuse our application is devastating. And whilst we respect her view, we feel it unjust, given the fact that she has not met with us or inspected the inside of the annex. If she had, we feel sure it would have been readily accepted that it's unsuitable as it is, and with a lift as she has suggested. We also feel that her recommendation is harsh, given what we are trying to achieve versus the significant redevelopment that's been allowed locally. The annex is peaceful, private, and the perfect place for my father and his wife to enjoy this chapter of their lives without the stresses that they're currently experiencing. Excuse me. This is our last hope that you will reconsider our application and reject the recommendation of the case officer, because time is not on our side here, and we really want to secure planning to build the extension as soon as possible before the winter sets in and one of them has a fall or becomes ill. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Eleanor, and well, just in time as well. So thank you for that. Councillor Walker, are you wanting to speak on this? Because I haven't got you on the list, but I presume you would like to. Yep, fine. Yes, that's okay. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. This is the first time that I've spoken in support of an application that's being put forward for you all to refuse. In the past, I've spoken out against building on Greenbelt in and around Ruddington, but I've come this afternoon to ask this committee to allow this extension to an existing building because I do feel it fits the bill for special circumstances. It does not harm the Greenbelt as it has a small scale of change and the circumstances outweigh the harm. The argument is clear regarding the acceptability of this house. It clearly cannot meet the needs as it stands. The changes they're proposing are proportional. There are no objections that have been made by neighbours or the others in the community. Rather, everyone's very much in support. One of the roles of elected members is to be the ear on the ground for local councils, so I'll take this opportunity to put this application into a local context. Ruddington has experienced a huge growth in housing, and much of this has been what is used to be called Greenbelt. These sites were removed from Greenbelt to facilitate the constructions of over 500 homes in varying sizes. It has changed the look and the feel of the village in considerable ways. Some are positive, and some, like the lack of school places, have been hugely disruptive. It appears that what is deemed sacred as a matter of policy is one that favours large plans as opposed to the little stories that matter and that allow people to live in a way that facilitates multi-generational living. I hope this committee does give this application a proper debate, because that is what this committee is designed to do. It is here to hear the stories like this, and not just to rubber stamp existing policy, but rather to make decisions that go above policy and keep in their minds the people living in their wards, to hear their troubles and to help in a real and proactive way. I ask this committee to hear the story of this family and understand that small exceptions can be made in the same way we have made allowances for buildings of hundreds of homes around Reddington and on Greenbelt. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. That's very clear and helpful, and basically it's in support of the applicant. Do you want to come back? I suspect there's probably no need to come back any of these points, so because it's all very, very clear what the situation is. So we'll open up to discussion. Councillor Edivine, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's always very difficult when you see things like this, because planning is sometimes no friend of personal circumstance. And obviously, as members of the committee, we are asked to respect the green belt, etc., etc. Can I just ask the officer? We talked about a 50% increase to an extension. I know you said it wasn't a hard and fast rule, but obviously I think I've seen enough of applications in the past that have taken advantage of that. But I didn't really understand why you felt that this particular one, it's 45% increase in volume. What were the main reasons? And would you say that if this was, is it because of the plan itself, or would this have benefited from pre-app discussion where they could have come up with a plan that may have been acceptable, do you think, or is that just too much speculation?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your question. We can't speculate on whether something, if they'd have come forward for pre-application, whether something would have been acceptable or not. Obviously, we're looking at the application that's before us and that's been applied for. In terms of the main reasons that we do not consider the extension to be a proportionate addition, it's really the level of accommodation that's proposed. It will be a 3-bedroomed property with a living room, a conservatory, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms downstairs, and it is capable of being lived in completely separately from the main dwelling. So we consider that the extensions would result in an annex that is no longer subservient or ancillary to the main property. And I note that in 2016 we also had a similar application for extensions that came to the same conclusion. Obviously different extensions, but they came to the same conclusion that further accommodation, level of accommodation would result in that. So that's really why we consider that the extensions would be disproportionate. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it answers the question. I also sort of I've always had problems with the definition of the openness of the green belt when it's in someone's garden. It shouldn't, obviously you can't have a carte blanche to build whatever you want, and particularly when you look at the area that is the green belt, in that area it's already got lots of housing on it. So it's green belt with housing basically. I always remember when I first sat on planning, being told that we were harming the openness of the green belt by allowing a new dwelling in the green belt that was surrounded by other housing, and that happened to be in Ruddington as well, on the old Loughborough Road. So I do sort of struggle a little bit with some of the concepts, but I also don't want to be seen to be weakening the green belt. So on that note, I'll let some other people perhaps make some comments.
Oh my word! Right. The first hand I saw go up was Councillor Calvert and then Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 45 says the proposed extension would not be visible from the public highway or public vantage points. Well, that seems to me to be something in its favour, and I think you would need to weigh that up against the comments that the planning officer has said about it being a change, if you like, to what it is at the moment, to being a new type of dwelling. But for me, and I'm a staunch supporter of the green belt, I feel that on balance, the fact that it can't be visible is quite important.
Thank you. Okay, you can come back if you want to come back. Yes, of course you can.
Sorry, I think the only thing I would say is that in terms of openness of the green belt, we've got to both look at it both visually and spatially. So yes, visually, we've addressed in the report that it would have limited impact because it's not visible. But in terms of the spatial impact, you know, having that level of accommodation, as we've said, would be read as a separate dwelling. So do we consider spatially having an annex that's capable of being lived in separately in that location would be acceptable in greenbelt terms? So that's all I would say to that.
Thank you. Councillor Bird.
Thank you. My wife and I have looked after relatives at our house in the last 10 years, and some extra space would have been very valuable, not only for us, but for the relatives, for themselves. And I think in this case, it is fairly obvious that this is something that's needed. In the last application, we talked about what was needed in the village. Well, for individuals, I can see this is needed. And I welcome Jeff and Richard and thank them for their presentations to us, which if everybody who was doing planning presented the stuff as well as that, we wouldn't be sitting here till 5 o'clock. But I thoroughly recommend that we support this, and the reasoning is obvious. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I hear what you're saying, and are you in effect making a recommendation here?
I would quite happy to move that we accept.
Well, what you would need to do is, if you're making a counter proposal, you need to have a think about what the proposal is, and you might want to have a think about any potential subject to conditions type of thing. So just maybe keep that thought in your mind. Yes. Now, Councillor Walker, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested by this analysis around disproportionality, particularly in relation to the fact that we've got two buildings. So in one sense, we're looking at the rule of the 50% rule of thumb and applying that to the existing annex, if I've understood correctly, and saying that that's a 45% addition. So in and of itself, it wouldn't be triggered by that. But then we're being asked to look at it in the context of the main dwelling, which does make it disproportional. But if the main dwelling was going up by 45% and was having going from a 3 to a 4.5 or a 5-bedroom property, then presumably we wouldn't be having this discussion. So I'm just trying to understand in layman terms as best possible, you know, what this specific issue is, which seems to arise out of the fact that we've got the two dwellings there.
Yes. Do you understand the point? Yeah.
I think I understand what your question is. So in terms of looking at disproportionality in extensions, we're looking at the volume increase of the annex as a building, so not an increase to the dwelling. If the annex was sited closer to the main dwelling, then we would consider that the extensions would be an extension to the main house, but it isn't. It's sited quite far away. So we're looking at, in terms of disproportionality, we're looking at the volume increase to the annex, not in connection with the main dwelling. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, but then you're saying, in and of itself, if it was the only dwelling on the site that we were considering, it's unlikely that we would view it as being disproportionate because it's a 45% increase under the 50% normal threshold. The reason I think you're saying it's disproportionate is because of the fact that there is another dwelling on the hereditament. So that's the bit that I haven't quite understood yet about why the presence of the main house makes it disproportionate, even though in and of itself it's not.
I think Mrs. Dodd is going to step in.
Yeah, I think we have to look at it in context. So when we look at the MPPF, it's very specific about disproportionate additions to a building. But when we think about openness, we think about the wider context that that site is sitting in. So we're looking at that wider context in terms of the openness.
Does that help? Well, have a ponder, have a think about that, and then Councillor Ellis wants to come in.
Chair, the two grounds that seem to cause refusal are the disproportionality and the effect upon the green belt. Well, in terms of disproportionality, that is a highly subjective judgment, and I can see no reason why a 45% increase to an annex would be disproportionate. And as far as the green belt is concerned, I don't buy the spatiality aspect, and the visibility. There is no impact whatsoever. So I think we have every reason to recommend. We do not approve officers' recommendations, and if you put that forward as a motion, I'd be happy to second it.
I'd be very happy to, but I think I perhaps need his help in wording.
Well, I'm sure that we can advise accordingly in that regard. Just before we do it, does anyone else wants to come in at this stage, or shall we just have a discussion about the? Because I have a feeling. Yes, Councillor Mallender.
Thank you, Chair. I was just, is it correct that the original building is also 3-bedroomed? Because I was just wondering why it seems to be that there's a problem with it being a 3-bedroom, 2 of which are downstairs and you can imagine that in the future there might be a carer living in or something, so that might be upstairs and the other 2 downstairs possibly. As someone who also has a coach house at the bottom of their garden, but a much smaller type because it's in West Bridgford, but the I think it's the fact that it's not near the house is due to the size of the garden. So and that's not really, it is part of the garden nevertheless. So I still think it's within that property. So it's not like it's going to become separate. And I don't think, again, I think it's a matter of opinion whether the extensions are of such a scale that they're disproportionate. So I think I'll certainly be voting should the motion to approve be forward. I shall certainly be voting in favour of it.
Thank you. Well, again, that's why we're here. We have the information in front of us. We have the arguments for and against, and we have to weigh up the various options, don't we? And that's what we're doing. So, have you had a thought of possible guidance on possible wording for Councillor Bird's possible recommendation?
I think just to clarify it won't go in the actual recommendation, but just for the minutes to show. So I think from the debate, the way councillors are moving is that actually they think the extension does not result in a disproportionate addition.
Yeah.
Rather than that it's disproportionate, but there's very special circumstances. Yeah. So that's when we do the minutes, that's what we'll be talking about, is that it does not result in a disproportionate addition. So if members are minded to make a motion to approve, councillors might want to think about putting a condition on for matching materials, and to ensure that it remains in an ancillary use so that it doesn't become an independent dwelling. So I would recommend 2 conditions along those lines. If Councillor Bird wants to.
Would there be a time limit on making it a separate dwelling, or would it just be a rule?
It would be forever. It would need to be words to that effect, I think.
Yes, so it would be in perpetuity.
Yeah, in
However, there would be nothing to stop an applicant coming back at a later date and applying to separate those 2, which they could be quite easily separated into 2 separate dwellings. But that would be a separate planning application.
Yeah, is that helpful? Yes. Well, just before I go to Councillor Way, did you have your hand up? No, Councillor Way.
Just a point of clarification on this condition. You say that would be in perpetuity, and would that also apply if the property changed hands at some point? You would. Thank you.
Okay, so that would be, should it be going the way it might be going, that will be a condition, a significant condition. Right, any other comments on this? It's Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I move that we accept this proposal and grant it on one condition, that it stays submitted to the House forever.
So really, I think you're picking up the point that Mrs. Dodds.
Yeah.
Yes, it's there. It's there anyway. So I think in effect, Councillor Bird, are you really moving this? Yeah. And we had Councillor Ellis was seconding. Are you happy with those? Does anyone else wish to make any other suggestions, condition-wise? Councillor Mallender.
Yeah, I presume all the other usual conditions will apply as well. Sort of, you know, whatever surveys might be necessary, and drainage and those kind of things. I don't know when they would. Anything that would normally apply. Yeah.
The standard sort of conditions that go in line with residential dwellings.
Okay. I know this has happened before when we've gone against this kind of thing. Thank you.
So yes, they would. Yeah. Right. I don't think anyone else has wanted to come in on this, and we've seen the presentation. We've had an alternative recommendation moved and seconded. This is to grant permission as opposed to refuse permission. So I think if we're all ready to make a decision, let's have a show of hands for that recommendation to grant permission. Right. So I think for the record, that's unanimous. So permission is granted, along with important conditions that need to be kept in mind and remembered. Okay. So that's that application. We move on to our final item, which is just an item for note. Sorry, ladies. Sorry, I'm sorry to be a bore here, but we've got one other item on the agenda. Very, very briefly, we need to just note Jen. We just need to note a result of a recent appeal. We're doing this now at the planning committee, where any appeals that have been come and gone, we record. And this was Garden Lodge, Melton Road, Ed Walton, and it was for a substantial extension, and as you'll see, it's been dismissed, and it was a delegated decision anyway. So with that noted, we've had a busy afternoon this afternoon, very diverse applications again. I mean, it's fascinating, really. And so thank you for your patience and input, and we'll close the meeting at 18 minutes past 5. So thank you, colleagues, as well. Okay.